This time I'll call the special call meeting of the Haywood County Board of Education to order. This time I'd like to ask Mr. Jimmy Rogers if he'd lead the board in our prayer, immediately followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Board members, please rise.
Let us pray. Our Heavenly Father, again, we want to thank you for the many blessings you bestowed upon us. Lord, we want to thank you for the many opportunities that you've given us to help children achieve the goals that they need to achieve to be successful in life. We thank you for the hard, diligent work that all of our teachers and staff have put into this school year, unusual school year and different school year, Lord, but we pray that your guidance is continually upon us as we continue to try to move forward and try to help children have the best education possible that they can have, Lord. We pray that you keep us safe, you keep our children safe, and keep them learning to the best that they can. Lord, we thank you for your guidance upon everything that we do here as members of this board. We thank you for your guidance in helping us to make the best decisions, that it does the best benefit to our staff and the children and the teachers and the community of Haywood County. Lord, thank you for all that you've done for us. And Lord, let us always know that we'll give you the praise and the glory for it all. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. Just one announcement, well, two actually. Our next regular board meeting will be here Monday, April the 19th at the Education Center at 7 o'clock. And second announcement is that Dr. Rogers had an emergency at the hospital with a parishioner, so he's not here. But he's asked me to call him if there's a vote tonight, so we'll call him. If we can get a hold of him, he would like to be on record as voting on the motion on the floor tonight. Are there any agenda adjustments? Next, I need a motion.
Thank you.
To approve the agenda.
Make the motion.
Okay,
Second.
Mr. Henson's made the motion, second by Mr. Francis to approve the agenda as presented. Any questions or comments on the motion on the floor? There being none, we'll vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We have had someone request to speak to the board in open session. Ms. Kim Ross, representing the Haywood County Association of Educators. You may come forward and let me read the comment before the comment. Now is the time period designated by the Haywood County Board of Education for public comments. This time is set aside for comments from the general public in regard to matters of concern to the public. However, comments addressing specific students and/or personnel are prohibited due to confidentiality laws and regulations. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. The board requests that all speakers adhere to the time limitation and prohibition against mentioning individual students and personnel. Thank you for being with us here tonight, Ms. Ross.
Thank you. So yes, I'm Kim Ross, and I'm here representing HCAE. And we at first would like to thank Dr. Nolte and Brooke for sharing the data that you have in front of you. We are so grateful for your time, and we'd like to share just a few items of note. So we've had 107 responses from Saturday night until today at 9:30 a.m. As always, HCAE is very eager to collaborate for a more complete polling. You'll see the breakdown on the breakdown sheet, it's about halfway through the back, that only 7.7 of stakeholders represented feel confidently included in the planning of the return to Plan A. We hope that this evening can help to raise that number. Only 23.1% of those represented, and I believe this is on the front page, feel comfortable returning to Plan A before April, giving a total of 76.1% who expressed a desire to wait until an April 1st return at the earliest. and this left 34.6% preferring to return in the fall. So overall, the families were at 36.8% who asked for a minimum of 1 week to prepare their families to return for this full on-campus learning. So 61.4% of this questioned the timing of return and asked for 2 to 4 weeks to prepare, and this included staff and families. That we needed 2 to 4 weeks, okay? Another percentage to consider is how best to support our staff. 41% reported that they were unlikely to consider other employment options should the full return to learn be imminent, though 13.4% were open or are open to exploring or pursuing a change in employment. So now at this time, approximately half of our schools have had access to one of the 2 shots that are necessary for recommended protection. The other half have yet to receive any vaccination opportunity. So we believe that a level of confidence will raise with the full vaccination opportunities, all right? So we urge further collaboration and the data be considered between the staff and the families. So we hope to have a successful and confident continuation of learning this school year. So if there is any time remaining, we ask that you review the data before you. Well, thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Ross.
How
And I
many,
appreciate sharing the data.
Thank you, and that's Brooke, yes.
yeah, do you, I know you've got, the survey was submitted by 107 people. How many did this go out to?
This went out to, I don't know the total that it went. You mean how many received it and did not
Received it but didn't respond?
return it? I really don't know.
You don't
I
know?
can't answer that.
Okay.
Don't have that data.
How many members do you have?
Oh golly, maybe 30-ish, something like that.
Okay.
So this went out to beyond members.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ross. I just received word that Dr. Rogers is on his way, should be here within about 3 to 5 minutes. Just wanting to announce that. If you would, let's use this time to look over the data. And so Dr. Bill, if you would, guess we need to first get a motion on the floor to talk about this. So at this time, we entertain a motion, some type of action on Senate Bill 220.
So moved.
David Burnett's made the motion, second Mr. Rogers. Any questions or discussion on the motion on the floor? I'm sure there is. I've got questions. Dr. Bill, what are your thoughts about returning these kids back in kind of a timeline maybe that y'all have thought about?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This is an important, I hope everyone can hear me with the mask on. This is an important decision, and very often with important decisions, it doesn't factor down to one thing. So in anticipation that you would ask me what I thought, I've made a few notes. So, and I think I will take the mask off. You good, Brooke? 6 feet away. Let me scoot over here so everyone can hear me. I just want to start before we get in too deep and just thank people, and thank you. That's a good guy right there giving me my glasses. I just want to be thankful and very proud of our teachers, our support staff, including instructional support, teacher assistants, clerical, bus drivers, custodians, administrators, students, parents, and our board. Together, you all have done a really good job of preventing the spread of COVID-19 in our schools. We could not have done that, certainly, even with that large group. And we know we owe a good bit of thanks to Dr. Mark Jabin, who Dr. Putnam and I talked to early this morning, Garen Bradish, the current health director, Patrick Johnson, the previous health director, and certainly our public school nurses who have helped us with contact tracing. They are nothing short of saints. They're just great people, and they work very, very hard to do contact tracing and determine if cases were spread inside or outside of school. From the very beginning, we worked very hard to figure out what we could do rather than what we could not do. We went to work really, really quickly to try to help our community and to try to provide as much education as we could to our students. That started with our people serving over 750,000 meals to those who needed those meals. We distributed supplies, materials, and equipment for students to use at home back last spring. When state orders and rules allowed in late September, we implemented Plan B 5 days a week, more than most school systems, on a rotational basis of every other week. And then when state orders and rules allowed in early October, we implemented Plan A 5 days per week for kindergarten through 5th grade. So that's about 6 months of doing that. And we've had a number of cases among students and staff, but only 6 that we're aware of among staff members who decided to eat too close together with their mask off, and that was in early October. So nothing since then that we're aware of. This has, gone really, really well. I think now we're in a little different place. We're in a place where the North Carolina General Assembly, House of Representatives, and the Senate, Governor Roy Cooper, the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services through their toolbook, the State Superintendent of Schools, the State Board of Education, and many others say that we can have Plan A for middle and high school students. That's quite a group of people who say that that is now allowable. The ability to do this effectively is also supported by a great deal of research in North Carolina, research in Wisconsin, research across the nation by the CDC, and it's also supported by what we have done in our local schools and what other local schools in North Carolina and across the country have done. I have a high school classmate that I roomed with in college who is an administrator in a large high school in Georgia, and they've been going pretty regularly without spread at school. So I won't name him because I don't want people calling him, but there's a lot of that going on. We have had some suggestions that we probably shouldn't change right now because it is another change, and it is. We've had way too many of those, or because there isn't enough time left in the school year for it to make a lot of difference for students. If we do not delay too long, our high school students who were able to choose Plan A for the rest of the year could actually have 1/2 or 50% of their last semester in person at school with a teacher. That's significant. As a former middle school principal, I will also tell you that it is significant for 6th through 8th graders. Again, if we do not delay too long in giving an option A to our students and families that a lot of people have now approved, our middle school students could have 1/4 or 25% of their year in person every day at school. That's significant. And that kind of time in person at school could have a big impact on a lot of students. As a middle school principal and elementary principal, and worked at a high school too, but at those 2 grade levels, there were a lot of lights that came on the last quarter of the year as information came together for students. So I think the time that's left is important. Dr. Putnam and I talked to Dr. Jabin this morning on the phone, and he is a smart fellow who has been really, really helpful to us. He's done a lot of meetings with teachers about safety. He's advised us on things that we needed to look at and adjust. And he is cautious, as he should be, as a medical professional. But, you know, he'll be one of, I think, I don't want to speak for him, but he did tell me this morning that our positivity rates are as low as they have been since last fall, when we moved to Plan B for middle and high and Plan A for elementary. Dr. Putnam pointed out to me this morning that when we moved to Plan B for middle and high and Plan A for elementary, our rates were trending up. They were trending up, and now we're in a situation where they're trending down. And so just another reason that we might want to consider moving to Plan A for middle schools and high schools. A lot of folks have, as I've already pointed out, think it's okay for us to do this. And like many of you, I spend a lot of time in the community. Almost every Saturday, I have this little routine. I get up, get dressed, get something to eat, go get gas, go haul off the trash. Sometimes I swap out shirts at the cleaners. If there's a flea market open, I go, and I roam around the community on Saturdays and talk to people. And I can't tell you the number of times that people have asked me, when are you going to allow our students to go back to school full time? So I know that in talking to people, a lot of people think it's time, from the decision makers that I mentioned earlier to other citizens in the state, including the teachers and school staff. A year ago today, on March the 16th, our students were not allowed to come to school in person for the first time. That was a year ago today. And many of us have worked really hard over the last year to get back to the point where it was okay and it was allowable by the state, and we had precautions in place not to have spread on school campuses. And we've just worked really, really hard to get to a day like this when it was possible for us to give our students at middle schools and high schools and their parents the option. They don't have to come. They could do remote learning, but to have that option. And so, you know, for those reasons, I would recommend to you that you have a motion on the floor, but I would recommend to you that you do allow middle schools and high schools to have Plan A available to them soon. And you may want to ask some questions. I do have some recommendations about how you would time that and how you would look at that, if that's something that you wanted me to advise you on, or if it's something that you wanted to work on as a board.
Dr. Nolde, I think the motion was very open. We haven't set a time for reopening, so I would suggest that you maybe give us that, what you would recommend.
Well, and I have not done this independently. I've talked to some other people I've trusted. I won't throw them under the bus unless it's an unpopular decision. But they're folks like me. They don't get to vote, but they have been in education for quite some time. I would consider or ask you to consider going to Plan A 5 days a week for middle and high school beginning actually next Tuesday. Now that sounds a little funny, but let me explain why. There are lots of reasons why that might be really good timing. First of all, I think even the NCAE survey said that there were about almost a fourth of the people who said they could prepare their homes in a week. I suspect it might be more than that, because I've talked to a very broad range of people in the community beyond the survey. The other reason that that's a really good time is that we have 2 remote learning optional teacher work days in the calendar that we have had there for some time. One in March to give teachers some time to work on instruction for remote learners, and we will still have those. We'll still have remote-only learners that we'll need to provide some instruction to. And we have a remote learning optional workday on Friday, the Friday before spring break, April the 2nd, I believe. I'd have to look at the calendar. And so if you voted to start on the 23rd, you'd actually be starting with 2 4-day weeks. And those 2 weeks would be bookended by remote learning optional days that would give teachers a little bit of time to plan and certainly a little bit of time to regroup before spring break if they chose to do so. So that's what I would recommend. It would also not cause a change in the calendar. And then, would recommend that after spring break, you just follow the calendar as it is with the days.
It's my understanding too that this would allow the Board of Education, if we have problems, to revisit going back to another type of option. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And I want to give, regardless of what you vote on, part of my conversation with Dr. Jabin I thought was really important, and he and I actually had this conversation before this morning, but we had it again this morning, is that I would give us a word of caution if you don't change a lot, or if you go to plan A. We have had some surges after school breaks. We've had those Thanksgiving, we've had those with winter break, Christmas, and New Year's, and other holidays that are recognized at that time. And so we do have Easter in a spring break. So regardless of what you all vote on or don't choose not to do tonight, I would strongly recommend that we proceed with caution, especially after spring break. We were able to staff our schools and prevent on-campus spread after the Christmas holiday, and we would want to monitor that very carefully. And I think I would publish that too. Either way that you might vote, I would caution people to be very careful after that break. We're walking through the forest, and I don't want to have too many metaphors here, but I can see the open field out in front of the forest. I'm just not quite there yet, but I'm pretty close and I can see it. So I do think if we'll be careful, probably just through the end of this year, next year could be pretty bright. So, that's what I would recommend to you, and certainly any of us who've worked on this and thought about that, this can answer questions. Trevor and I have had several questions about where we might even be a little bit tighter than the state regulations on social distancing, just to be careful and cautious. And of course, Jill and I have talked. We met with middle school and high school principals. What day was that? Friday? Monday? Yeah, it does all run together. Monday. Yesterday we met with middle school and high school principals, so we may be able to answer questions about that.
What about, I guess the closest place would be maybe cafeteria?
Let me let Dr. Putnam talk about that, and we've actually talked to public health about that too.
Okay,
But he's had more of those conversations than I have.
all right.
You wisely point out the toughest spot on campus, the toughest activity, which is eating. And because that's the one place that you're going to be able and allowed and should remove your mask. We search for guidance that explicitly states you cannot sit within 6 feet of folks in the cafeteria, although that explicit language is not there. So I inquired of Dr. Jabin, as I have so very often, who reached out to his state constituents, and basically it's assumed that folks would maintain 6 feet of distance in a cafeteria. They talk about mass gathering places such as in PE and gymnasiums and on fields and in lobbies where people congregate in mass numbers, and in those areas to maintain 6 feet of space. But that still did not help with the cafeteria. And so the recommendation of our local medical director and the health department is that in the cafeteria, that we continue to maintain 6 feet of social distancing in those areas where we cannot wear a mask. So that is the only exception that I'm aware of. All of the other North Carolina Strong Schools Public Toolkit information remains in effect. Basically, they've collapsed social distancing to minimal social distancing to be 3.5 feet or an arm's length away versus 6 feet away, which is 2 arms lengths. I guess depending on how tall you are. But Mr. Francis has
It's
got a
8
little,
feet, Mr.
little
Francis.
greater span there.
You got quite the wingspread there.
2 feet, 2 feet.
So, but they reiterate several times throughout the toolkit that under Plan A, with the minimal social distancing, that all other safety protocols apply. Frequent hand washing, frequent sanitation, and disinfection, and minimizing social distancing or maximizing social distancing where it's possible. Eliminating the use of shared devices, tools, equipment, and clearly marking floors and designating egresses and ingresses clearly so that there's no cross traffic. All those are still applicable.
So, like in a cafeteria situation, are we gonna, you still wanna try to do 6 feet, but do we have space to do that, or did you just say that we weren't gonna?
We talked with the secondary principals on Monday, and I shared with them what our elementaries have done. They've done a marvelous job. What it means is where we might typically have 4 classrooms of students in the cafeteria, maybe we're gonna have 2 to give us ample space, and create that on a rotation. Maybe this week, the first 2 classes, they stay back in their classroom, and the last 2, they go and eat in the cafeteria, and then we flip-flop that the next week. Utilize them with pretty weather on the way, courtyards, track areas, fields, school frontage, areas where kids can eat in out of doors, which, best I remember, I love that, and kids
yeah.
at the middle, high schools do too. So those are the top remedies that we seek out in instances where the mask cannot be worn.
That was where I was getting a lot of questions from, so you've answered my question. Thank you.
Policy and procedure by the local board can tighten up, if you would, what any of the government mandates are. So we can specify this is the way we want it done. And regardless of what it says minimal, we don't have to necessarily, we can always make it more stringent.
We can always be more restrictive, we just cannot be less restrictive.
Correct.
I think that's what we've already done a lot of, and that's why, like you mentioned earlier, that's where we've been a lot successful. And our kids already being back in person is due to that more isolation time and tighter on our distancing, and I think that's been very good, helpful already, so we just continue to follow those guidelines above and beyond what CDC requires.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I apologize for being late. I had a situation I had to take care of.
Announced it.
But I understand there's been a motion on this floor. Can it be restated so that I can catch up?
To discuss.
Made a motion to discuss it, yes.
The House Bill 220.
Okay.
So the question, I know we talked about the teachers, all the questions I have is, most of them won't be getting their vaccination done until after spring break, correct?
They won't have an opportunity for a second one until after spring break, unless they got it at other places. We know probably over 60% of our people have signed up through the opportunities that we have inside the county, and our public health people have done a really good job of administering the vaccines that they had available. I do know that a number of other people have gotten it earlier in other places where there are more vaccines. So, no, not everyone would have all of their vaccines in play. Of
We
course,
did explore the Johnson & Johnson one-shot. Talked with Garen Bradish, the interim health director, which I don't know, I think he's still interim health director. Anyway, he's who's advised me through this vaccination process. We wanted the Johnson & Johnson, and if we could have pulled that off, then the two groups that are scheduled for this week and next, they could have had their one shot, and then the first group that has already had their vaccination could have their second shot before spring break, and we would get everybody in. The problem with the Johnson & Johnson, they do not have that available to them, nor are they going to. I think he said the next possible opportunity for the Johnson & Johnson shot to enter North Carolina would be in a couple of weeks. So we really have been active in pursuing every opportunity to have our folks vaccinated, because we know it's important to them and it's important to us. And we've tried every way in the world to get them in early and often for those vaccinations. But, as Dr. Nolte pointed out, our health department's done a marvelous job of vaccination. They've actually done it in the advised order by North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services and the governor's office. I know other counties have done it out of turn or out of order, if you will, which has raised some questions as to the way they're doing it, but I can assure you they're following the procedurally the order, if you will, that's been described to them for vaccination.
I would add too, we made pretty strong arguments to state officials that our teachers and other teachers who were already doing some type of in-person instruction should have gotten the vaccine first. I know that might sound a little selfish, but I thought they should have it before teachers who had not done any in-person learning this year in 25 school systems across the state. That fell on deaf ears. I think I would be more concerned about not having a second vaccine if we had seen transmission from student to student or student to staff. Certainly we need to be concerned about every aspect of this decision. Every bit of it is important, and there are lots of factors.
Well, I'd also, if I'm not mistaken, the teachers that have been teaching since last fall didn't have any vaccinations in Florida and Georgia, is that correct?
Well, I don't know. I have talked to a high school classmate and a college classmate who's an administrator in Georgia, but I did not ask him about vaccines.
I have
asked him.
talked to a teacher from Florida that's been teaching since last fall in full capacity.
Yeah.
No vaccinations.
Yeah.
I know we've
Ask,
been very lucky, but I'm just saying that it can happen.
I'll ask D, that's his initial. I asked him about transmission rates and what they do about, ball games and such.
Well, I have one other question, and I think it's going to be to Ms. Barker. Given the remote learning models at the high schools, especially where those teachers early on said, I want to teach my kids, regardless of remote or in person. How's this going to affect that relationship and the load that's on the teachers? Have they got a plan?
They do. When we met with high school and middle school principals, that was one of our main, pieces that we talked about are just the class sizes. I know some of our high school classes are, mid-20s, and it's Dr. Putnam pointed out to me this morning, we were talking about that. Some of them are furniture issues. It's not just the class size issue, it's a furniture issue. Some teachers have tables, they don't have the desk, 30 desks that you can space out. So we talked to the principals about that, and those will be things that they will have to look at. They do have media centers that in high school, somebody's always on planning time, they could move to a different room. So I think they'll look at those on an individual basis, and not all classes are that big, but we definitely have some that will be. in both of those sessions. So those principals will have to look at that and try to do the best they can with that distance on a case-by-case basis.
How are they gonna, are they gonna change their model of teaching
No, sir.
both remote and, okay.
No, sir. Everybody felt like, every principal, that their model would hold, and that's something we talked a lot about when we got those models. If we come back full-time, will this hold? We don't want another significant schedule change. I'm not saying there won't be a schedule change, but from what they said, everything should hold as it is.
Have we looked at some of those class sizes? Because I know there's some concerns about maybe students having to be moved to another teacher, sort of like they were back in September when we went to this model. Would they have to go back to some of those classes that we moved away from? And are some of these kids gonna be getting new teachers and new classes here right before the end of school?
They did not indicate. We talked to those principals. They did not indicate. They felt like their models would hold and there would not be any class changes.
Yeah, and we did have to make some changes, in particular at the middle schools, some at the high schools, but at the middle schools, because we were grouping small percentages of remote-only students together to give them a teacher. And so typically, one teacher at a grade level at a middle school or or in a department at a high school, more at the middle school, would take those students in that subject. So we had to group some together. So those students, those teachers may just keep the remote-only ones. And basically what would happen in very oversimplified terms is, instead of A coming this week and B coming next week, they'll just come together. The remote-only stuff should not change a lot. We have y'all haven't asked about this, but I know this is a question that will probably come up, and we have talked to our principals about this. We do know that there will be a number of students. We don't know if it'll be a small number or a large number, but there will be some students who will want to go from remote only to all in person, or from Plan B to remote only. And I think if you vote to move to Plan A for middle and high, the principals would ask them to declare that probably the first week that you do it, and then they would work to get them transitioned pretty quickly after that.
So
Dr. Rogers.
we don't have a feel for how many,
Well, we haven't surveyed them. What I would say is, pretty consistently, from the surveying that we did before school started and the follow-up questions that teachers did with families early in the year, and the surveying that we and NCA, but mainly what we did in the middle of the year, that percentage of about 25% plus or minus, depending upon the school, is going to be remote only. So I suspect that might change, but that percentage is held pretty steady all year long. And when I talk to other superintendents, their percentage is not the same as ours, but that percentage is held for the most part.
so there may be some flip-flopping, but it's probably gonna land back at the same percentage point.
I don't think it will change much. I hope I'm wrong, and we have a really safe environment, and you all allow them to come, and more of them come, and we don't have any problems. But I think there are certainly a percentage of people who don't need to come, students. You know, they have legitimate health concerns. I talked to a mom on the phone at the end of last week, and it was a gut-wrenching situation. You know, they would love to be at school but just can't. And of course, she wanted to try to figure that out and for her remote instruction to be as best as possible. But there are students who, for a multitude of reasons, are limited to remote only.
Well, I
If
think-
we choose to go back to Plan A, and a student shows symptoms, and I'm not talking, necessarily coughing their head off, but a simple symptom, are they gonna have the option to do remote learning for a day or a couple of days while they show symptoms?
It's really hard to do that with 15 schools and, little under 7,000 students. What we try to do in situations like that is we ask them to get to their doctor as quickly as we can. If somebody thinks it's COVID, you know, we get them to the public health nurse. Certainly, we would provide them with makeup work, just like if they were sick during a normal year. It's hard to swap them back and forth between the plans. That's really hard on teachers. And we will have things like that. We've got a little bit of a stomach bug going around at a school right now, and I sort of joked in the curriculum and instruction staff this morning. I said, folks, I got good news and bad news. What do you want? And they said, we want the good news. I said, well, let me tell you the bad news. We got some students out in this school. Good news is it's a stomach bug. I never thought we would feel good about that, but in this odd world that we're in, we were glad it was not COVID.
That was my next question. So do we take everybody's temperature when they come in?
We do.
So what happened, and we may have talked about it, and I don't remember, so if we have a student that rode a bus in and they have a temperature, we just turn around and take them back home?
We notify the parent and hold them, notify public health, get the parent, ask the parent to take them to the doctor. We take a look at the bus to make sure people had their mask on and those kinds of things. And I'm doing your stuff, Dr. Putnam. I'm sorry. They to see if there are any people on the bus that would be considered a close contact, and so we handle it that way.
So have we had a lot of this?
We've had it, best count, and this is a rough number, I'm gonna say there's been 4 to 5 instances where someone actually showed up at school and was determined to be a COVID positive. Of those 5, I'd say there's probably more that I just don't know, and we've even had some kids who were at school symptomatic. But once we determine that, we have a designated COVID room where they go to, and we have a designated COVID contact person who has been trained by our public health nurses on what to look for and the questions to ask and how to triage that student.
So are we gonna be able to handle double, like temperature checking, and if we have 40 students one morning with 105 degrees, is it gonna be a mess?
That's a tough question.
I mean, it's some of the questions that's been asked us on emails and text.
If the pattern,
Facebook and
right.
email and smoke signals. And,
right,
you know,
if the pattern holds, we should be fine. As with anything, if you get a large influx, it becomes problematic. But if the pattern holds that we've witnessed over the last 3 or 4 months, we should be fine.
I got a question, and Logan brought up a really good point. Now, if a student is sick in their A week, you know, supposed to be in school in A week, and they test positive for COVID or quarantined or whatever, during that B week, they're still able to do classwork. Are they counted absent during that B week right now? As long as they're still doing their work and stuff and logging into their Google Meets?
Well, I'm kind of getting out of my area, so either of you, either
Because
Jill or
with
Dr.
us
Nolte.
going to full-time, now it's gonna be total absence, you know, so they're not gonna get that buffer, I guess, that second week of their B week or whatever
I can tell you that they do have to be counted absent.
during that time in their.
Not counting them absent would be forging a state document and saying basically that they're there and they're not.
What if they're logging into their Google Classrooms and participating? Because a lot of people with the COVID, you know, they may be diagnosed positive, but they show very mild or very little symptoms, so they're still able to log in and participate in classes online and stuff. So are we counting them absent?
We're not counting them absent right now. There was a lot of grace in the attendance this year, guidance issued by the state, that even on that off week, if students logged in, if they made contact with a teacher, then that was considered present. So our schools have been, I have not had one call about attendance this year. I think our people, our teachers have been very generous to our students and working with them. I think you bring up an excellent point. I think if it's a long-term quarantine situation, then they will need to work through that. They still have remote teachers on every campus. Tuscola does all synchronous. They could jump back into that. Pisgah does a lot of classes that way too. So those are just all pieces that the principals know that, but there's been a lot of grace this year, y'all know that, and just trying to work with students about where they are and absences, and we want to err on the side of caution. I want to go back to Dr. Rogers' question. The only other situation, Dr. Rogers, where their schedule might change would be if they did not want to do AB week anymore and they wanted to go to full remote. At Pisgah and Tuscola, that, you know, because they're synchronous, that wouldn't be as big of an issue. At Pisgah, they have a different remote teacher, so there might be some different teachers there. And I'm thinking at Waynesville Middle and Camp Middle, that could change some teachers if they decide to go AB and then go to all remote, because, you know, you can't hold all that depending on their situations. But the remote option is available and running and up and going and working really well if people wanted to choose that.
Well, I think Logan and Jim articulated that well, because we need to make sure that as we begin to move forward, should we, that we take those kinds of things into account. And the hard part about it is it's almost gonna have to be some school level decisions that are made of how they're gonna be doing it case by case, and which brings me to another point is there a way, and I just don't know, so I'm just asking the question, where maybe PLC times are extended so that at the grade levels, at the department levels, they can work through how are we gonna handle this? Because, you know, the best decisions are the ones made closest to the problem. So if we can figure out how they can manipulate the situation to do what's best for the student, I think we can make school-based decisions work.
I agree, and I wish you'd have been in the meeting with the secondary principals, because Dr. Bill really wanted to hear it from them. And they know their staffs and they know their school, and that's what they said. You know, we take care of our kids, we're gonna take care of our kids. They said these are gonna be individual student decisions and parent decisions, and they've been doing that along, and we know we'll have to work through that. But I was really proud of them, and I know they talked a lot about that, every family situation is different right now.
And they always do well. That's just part of Haywood County Schools. The staff and faculty and teachers always do well. There's just gonna be a need for, we have great communications, but we gotta take it to super great communications so that everybody knows the score.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to what Mrs. Barker said is that we did not tell our schools how to schedule from the very beginning. We told them, you know, based upon your decisions and our decisions, you're starting this on this date, and you're starting this on this date. And they built very different schedules in some instances, and I think they did that because they were working with their students and their community. So they still have that latitude as long as they're being safe and educating the students.
I have one last question, if you don't mind. And y'all may have already discussed it, but say there's a problem at X school, but it doesn't affect any other school, and we have to make remedies for X school. We don't have to change the whole system, right?
No, sir.
We can operate.
You have full latitude to close a grade level, close a building, close one school. And as we monitor, in particular the monitoring that we did right after Christmas, we will be in a position to tell you everything about that situation and advise you. But there is a great deal of latitude in being more restrictive. You don't have to be restrictive across the board.
Well, and I would think, Mr. Francis, that you correct me if I'm wrong, but with the authority given in the emergency COVID order, that would be something that you would be able to act upon, given that emergency authority, and then fill us in, correct? We don't want to try to call meetings and give notice when, when action needs to be taken. That's,
Yes, sir. You know I've used that authority in a very limited way, but as soon as I've done it, I've sent text or
sir.
called you or notified you.
It's worked well.
I look forward to the day that you take that back,
It's worked well.
post-COVID.
You know, my
We talked about students.
knob.
Is there a way to take care of employees, and it may not be possible at all? Where I talked about a minute ago, if students are feeling symptoms, what about if an employee's feeling symptoms? Or Jane Doe came in yesterday, was coughing her head off, and the teacher feels susceptible to COVID. Is the teacher or employee, custodian, principal, everywhere, are they going to be required to take personal leave days, annual leave days, sick days, whatever? Or is there a way that we could work with them on a day or two that they felt susceptible?
Yeah, we have to follow state and federal leave related to COVID. You know, I don't know how we give a sick day from the state that is not authorized under COVID. And Jason has talked about that several times. I wish I had specifically invited him tonight because he could tell you the codes for the particular leave days. But certainly anyone who is required to quarantine because they're a close contact, those days are covered for them. Certainly anyone who is positive. There are some provisions for leave related to legitimate child care, but just the fear that I might have a particular condition is not something that we can award an extra leave day. We just don't have that authority from the state or federal government.
It's true.
Yeah, at the risk of asking a question that's already been asked, but, given the time that we've been on Plan B, Dr. Putnam, how much, if any, have we had student to adult transmission?
Well, that's always hard to determine,
Document.
you know, but
Document.
as far as what the health department's sharing with us, we're not aware of any student-to-teacher transmission.
What about student to student?
We're also not aware of any student-to-student transmission.
So we've not been determined to have had any community spread within the school system?
With the exception of employee to employee, that's the only combination you did not ask. We did have that in two isolated situations at two isolated schools, two separate instances. And
What was
Dr.
the breadth
Nolte,
of that? What was the breadth of that spread? How many people was involved in those?
I think one had 3 to 4. And
Four in one group and 2 in the other.
Yeah.
And those were people very early on eating lunch without a mask back in October.
Too close.
I had to hedge just a little bit. I'm a doctor, but not that kind of doctor.
I asked Jason that question before I came. I asked him the other day, how many adults?
Dr. Bill, I've got two questions, and I guess any of you can answer it, but I'm going to go back to something that Ms. Barker said. Now, you said that Tuscola was on synchronous, which means that A, B, and online is all doing the same work at the same time, same week. Now, we know that obviously some of the other schools are not doing that. Some schools are teaching A week this week, then they're teaching B week, what A week just did, and then online, so on and so on. So do you think that in just now you're saying a week, now, I don't know whether you've already told the teachers or whatever, okay, you need to go ahead and start doing this last week, I don't know. But if we make a decision tonight, and that decision is to go back on Tuesday, how are the other schools besides Tuscola? Tuscola's going to be fine by just what Ms. Barker was saying. how are the other schools going to get everybody caught up to the same thing to start on Tuesday? And on top of that, you're giving them a week to get their classrooms in order, and the teachers are not going to be able to do that themselves. So who's going to be coming into the classrooms to help them during the day to get that done?
Yeah, those are great questions. We've talked about those. This happens to be B week,
Okay,
all right? So next week is A week. So in theory, everyone should be caught up at the end of this week, the A's and in theory, it's not a perfect world. And we do have some rooms with fewer seats in them, but a lot of the rooms still have all the seats in them. And so it will be a matter of positioning some of those differently. There will be some rooms that will obviously need to be moved. I think as Mrs. Barker said earlier, put this class in a larger room, see if we can use a larger space, library, media center, or some other space. But, we do have people who are there who aren't classroom teachers who can help with that. And we do have, teachers who are very excited about going back on Plan A who might help with that during planning or some other time.
well, thank you.
It's a quick turnaround. We
Yeah,
understand that, but
It is, and that was some of the information I was getting. Everybody wants to go back to school. I want to go back to school. I think I've been one of many on this board that said we're needing to get back in school, because I've always wanted to do that. And I've got 2 kids in school. They need to be in school in front of a teacher. I just want to make sure that we're not putting too much pressure on our teachers to do this turnaround in a week when they're already under pressure. And I know most of the teachers in Haywood County, they're going to sit here and say, you give it to us, we're going to get it done. I mean, because that's how good the teachers and administration are. They're just great at our school. So whatever you throw at them, they don't fix it. It's not going to matter. I was just wanting to make sure that all the students are going to be up at the same level if we go back next Tuesday. And you answered that the way that I thought that, in my head, that it was going to work, so.
I've got one comment and 2 questions. The comment is that most of the parents that I speak with are in favor of Plan A, and they've been in favor of it for a while. The first question is, if I'm understanding you correctly, even if we go back to Plan A, you're expecting about 75% of the students to be in class.
Yes, sir, and that varies from school to school. At some schools, it's close to 80 right now on A and B, and at other schools, it's closer to 70, 69, 70. But on average, about 3/4 of them would be. Again, we don't know until they have a choice to make, and they make that choice. What we're essentially doing is deciding whether or not they will have that choice. But I would imagine across the district it would be somewhere around 75%.
Okay. Question 2 is, any student or any parent that is uncomfortable with Plan A has the option for remote learning completed?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We would ask them to tell us that by the end of the first week that you approve for Plan A, if you so do that, and then the school would work pretty quickly to get that adjustment made for them.
I have a couple of questions, I guess. Okay, right now, to go back to the calendar, the 22nd of March is a remote day, correct?
Yes, sir.
And April the 2nd is a remote day.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And as far as the cafeterias at the high school, the lobby could be used, correct?
That's correct.
I mean, there wouldn't be no problem move tables out there,
That's correct.
the
And,
cafeteria on those. I know middle schools probably wouldn't be possible, but.
They also have commons areas, and I know Waynesville Middle has a lobby. Canton Middle is probably deficient in that area as far as a lobby goes, but possibly the library and other places. Allison Francis, a little brag on her, she preemptively ordered some tables with COVID money to provide more flexibility in seating, because now what would accommodate all of our students won't, but by the time you spread out. So we also have ordered additional tables. I think we got a bunch, I'll say that.
I guess I kind of go along the lines of what Stephen said in pushing to get in school or Plan A by the 23rd. How much pressure are we putting on our teachers? Have we talked to the teachers? How do they feel? I mean, I know you said y'all have had principals meetings, but have you actually talked to teachers? I know
We've not surveyed them again.
principals probably related to them.
Yeah, we've not surveyed them again. Certainly, I talk to lots of teachers every time I'm out and have them ask me about Plan A and other things. So we've not talked to them individually. One of the things was that we felt like this was a decision that the state just made end of last week. And if we were going to make the best of learning time for students, we would need to do that. We can certainly wait as a board and not make a quick move and pause and talk to teachers and survey them. I imagine, again, that the survey results around teachers would be very similar to what we have had before. And I brought that with me, and I can share that with you. But certainly it doesn't apply to this particular timing at this time of the year.
And the other question, which you kind of hit on just a little, what's the pros and cons if we wait till after spring break and start? I know that's 2 weeks.
Well,
Lose 2 weeks.
It's 2 weeks that they all won't be there in person, and so they'll lose a week of in-person, face-to-face time, and that is very valuable time. The benefit is that there would be an easier transition, but what you're really weighing there is the safety risks. I don't think the safety risks have changed. As a matter of fact, the safety risks are down, and that has been acknowledged by the governor, the state legislature, Health and Human Services, the state superintendent of schools, the State Department of Public Instruction. There is nothing connected to the safety risk. So it would be, swapping instructional time for ease of transition.
The fortunate thing about the timing, which none of us could have predicted, is if I'm calculating this right, we'll have 4 days, or we'll have a work day, and then or a remote day in 4 days.
Right.
Then we'll have 4 days and a remote day. Then spring break. So it's almost like we get an eased-in approach, not through planning, just through good fortune, blessing. And then we come back for our first 5-day week after spring break. I don't think we could have ever planned it that good.
I agree. I think if we'll have to go back
Gives us time for
sometime, and I
adjustment.
think this will ease us into it with that 4-day week and then another 4-day week.
I agree with Dr. Rogers there. I believe that it's timing that we couldn't have predicted it better or had it planned better for us. I personally, I've spoken with several people about the going back to school. I know Dr. Nolan and I've had a discussion about the middle school and the high schools, which is able to transition the easiest. And like I say, there may be a few changes in middle schools, but high schools seem like it's going to be an easier transition for them. it would be some of the middle schools. And I feel like this, like you mentioned earlier, half the time that we've got left in school, that, to me, that feels like at least we can get at least half of those who are struggling within their classes to maybe get them back on track to be successful with their academic performances, about having them in that classroom, those 5 days a week. And like I said, I agreed with that, who spoke to the teachers with like Mr. Henson asked, and I know the principals that have conversed with their teachers, and from what I've heard from teachers and from administrations, it's, we're gonna get these kids in there and let's try to, you know, like I say, we know there's a lot that's suffering, that's failing classes. Hopefully we can recoup their academic performances and get those children to where they're going to be successful and pass these classes, and that gives us that extra time and a little extra week to go there. So, but I thank y'all for your hard work with getting these principals ready, and the teachers are all ready, and I think the community's ready. So, I'm ready.
Well, you know, we've talked a lot about the educational side, but from my profession, I see a huge increase in depression due to social interaction and that sense of community that I think sometimes we take for granted, but it's a very important part of our lives. And that's very troublesome. And I don't think that, and not just, I'm not talking about just students, but the impact on the parents and the family have been tremendous. And we've got to take that into consideration as we move forward, I guess.
We need
Some stability.
Mr. Chairman?
I wanna say something else before we go any further. Larry asked how many people, this survey says 66% felt like they were not involved in the planning. But I wanna say something about the teachers. We have 2 more groups that want a vaccination. I have had my vaccination. I was lucky enough to get into a group. So I'll be asking them to do something that I wouldn't have to do. The other thing I don't like is first thing it was asked was, do we have an out? So if it don't work out, we can change the course. If we're gonna make a decision, let's make a decision. I don't want an out. Let's have it go 100%. So if we're not sure, let's don't make it emotional. Every parent's asked me to get them back in school. I agree with everything y'all say, especially what Bob was just saying. Everything's important, but our teachers are important too, and two groups wanted a vaccine, and they're asking by email and by here to have a vaccine before we do this. So it's something, I'm just saying consider. You know, let's don't vote, I mean, I'm emotional. I've had just as many people as y'all go through Canton, go through Ingalls, when we get back to school, but I don't want to, after spring break, say, whoa, it's a disaster, let's go back to playing. You know, if we're not sure, if the first question we ask, is there an out, then when we're not where we need to be. That's just my opinion.
I think the out's for an anomaly rather than a lack of assurance and direction. I think if you know, we've said now for a year that we're gonna follow the science and blah, blah, blah. Well, everything's indicating that we don't have to be in a panic over needing an out. But it's always nice to have extra quarter in your pocket, just in case you need to phone a friend.
Let me touch on something that Ronnie said now, and this was one of the questions I got out in the public was, now percentage-wise, we don't know what is a percentage-wise, or do we know that, of the teachers right now that's got the first shot? Because obviously, we know that the teachers that didn't have none, they may be some teachers that's got both of them, but do we know a percentage that's got the first shot?
We know about the ones who signed up locally.
Locally,
That's a little over 40% for the
the
first shot. We don't know, we
Number.
don't know what the total percentage of teachers who will get shots. We know that percentage was really low for the medical profession and teachers and other groups when the vaccines just came out. So we know about first shot 40% for the ones who've signed up locally. What we don't have are those that drove to another state, and a number did, those that went to Walgreens or a drugstore or went to Western. So I imagine that percentage is measurably higher. but I
Higher,
can't-
and then the ones that's got the first shot, if we would wait till after spring break, the first shot should be getting their second shot right before, or during spring break, or before, or right.
It'll be
as
2
soon-
or 3 weeks after. What are those dates, Dr. Putnam?
Can't give you the dates, but I can give you the breakdown. The week right before, which I believe to be the 29th, that will be the first group of
They got the
folks
first
that
shot.
got the first shot.
They would be getting their second shot.
And a gap.
In a gap,
Spring
'cause
break.
I know spring break, they didn't really wanna give any first shots, cause they didn't want nobody in the second shot
Right.
being spring break in case somebody's gone, okay.
Right, and then the week right after spring break that we come back, our second group that was getting their shots
Would
this
be-
week. So the very first week back will be that group. And then the second week back after April, after spring break will be the third shot group, which is scheduled for next week. So does that kind of help you? I'm
Yeah, yeah.
sorry, I
And
don't
then
have-
21 days later, they get their second shot.
Right, yeah, and I think that, and I agree with Ronnie, and like I said, I've been one of the ones that's pushed, we need to get back in school, we need to get back in school. Yet, it's still one of those things, I wanna make sure that the teachers feel safe enough to come back, which every teacher that I've talked to, it's not mattering to them, they'd go back tomorrow. And I guess it's just the ones that has the concerns from the survey, and probably some of the ones that's talked to other board members' emails, is that they would feel more comfortable. Seems like to me, what I'm getting from this and some of the other stuff is a lot of the ones that have submitted all this, they would really prefer to go back on the 12th, which is right after spring break. That's just what I'm getting from some of the things that I've got. Now, obviously, we've got to either make a decision tonight, or we just gonna do whatever. So somebody's gonna have to make a motion on what day, if that's which way we go. But that is some good numbers if we've got 40% that's got their first shot, and then they'll be getting their second shot in the week when they come back, or a week before spring break.
I got a comment. Most of us have asked the governor's office, we've asked our legislatures to get us back in school for months, actually.
Yes.
And now that they put it back to us to make the decision, it might look pretty silly if we go and don't put them back in school and don't give them the opportunity, even though anybody that has any reservations has an opportunity not to go to school. That's just my thought.
But our teachers don't have that option.
Well, the
Teachers won't have that option.
well, that would be true.
When is the next round of vaccines scheduled for our teachers?
The next round is scheduled this Thursday at the Lambeth Inn for the remainder of our elementary schools.
So our high school and middle school teachers, and this is who it's concerning, is our middle school and high school teachers. They're not scheduled to get one until next week or the following week, or?
They are scheduled for next week, next Thursday, to receive their vaccination.
Okay.
The remaining middle schools and high schools, as well as transportation, child nutrition, central office.
Would there be enough vaccines that day to cover all the ones that want to get them in the high schools, possibly?
I can certainly ask again, it doesn't hurt, but what I can tell you is, Our health department is already setting back vaccinations for us to even have the numbers to vaccinate. I mean, we're a pretty large employer. Basically, they've got it to where they can continue the work that they're supposed to with the 65-plus crowd, frontline workers. I think 75-plus crowd is complete, best I remember. But fulfilling all of those obligations for vaccination and supplying what we need, it's approximately 200 to 250 employees per session. So right around 600 to 700 shots or doses are needed. And so I don't think they can get there. It's a limited supply, but I certainly don't mind to ask. I do that on a weekly basis.
Dr. Putnam, I think that we're all failing to forget that our elementary teachers have been back 100% this whole time. Now we're pausing. I think that, you know, we've asked our elementary teachers to be on the front line now since back in October. And I think that they're to be commended for what they've done. And now finally we got a chance for vaccine. I think it's time we move forward, in my opinion.
Mr. Chairman, I think at this time, you got a comment, Mr.
Yeah, before you.
Go ahead and make your
I know
comment.
you're getting ready to make a motion of some sort, so just wait just a second. Please, please.
Go ahead, you got one.
Only thing I would like to say, this really ain't school related, is I do as a board member and as a kid of two parents, I would really like to just make it public. The health department in Haywood County has done the finest job of rolling out. Now, that when they first started, it was sort of rough, I believe. My daddy's already got he's already got both shots. My mother, she was in the 65 to 72. She's got her first shot, getting her second shot. My wife's already got it. I'll just tell you, the health department, I just want to publicly announce that they have done, in Haywood County, has done a phenomenal job of doing what they've done. Now, you go to some other counties, you want to hear some complaints, go to some other counties. Haywood County, you don't hear that. And I just want to commend them for doing what they have done. And hopefully we can get our teachers and staff up to par too.
Yeah, I've shared that sentiment with them frequently. They really have. If you've been to any one of the mass vacs, I took my mother through the clinic. It's a well-oiled machine, so.
And our school nurses that have helped with all that, and our schools have been a big part of that.
I think it's
All right,
very well
Mr.
said,
Rogers,
Mr.
Jimmy, do whatever you need to.
Well said.
Well, I agree totally with all, that was well said, yes, and I totally agree. That's why we say Haywood County's the best. That's why we say Haywood County School's the best, Haywood County's the best. We've got a great group of people that live in this country, so, right here in this county. But I do also at this time, Mr. Chairman, I really feel like that, we've been given the opportunities through legislature. We've studied this, we've looked over it. And I would like to make a motion at this time that we adopt, considering Plan A, beginning March the 23rd.
Is that the Tuesday?
That's Tuesday the 23rd.
It's a Tuesday following the remote learning optional
Okay.
workday.
Yes,
Just
sir.
want to make sure in my mind, we have a motion from Mr. Rogers, second Mr. Nesbit. Any questions or discussion on the motion on the floor?
I just want to say that I think everybody feels like the kids need to be back in school. I mean, we've talked about that, you know, for a long time, that they perform better, that remote learning is a good option for us. But, you know, having them back in school was definitely better for them. Parents definitely are ready for the kids to be back in school, especially those that work and are worrying about their kids being home by themselves. But, you know, there are some concerns with trying to, I don't want to say rush things and getting back into the classroom, because we might unintentionally or unknowingly, you know, let our guards down in some areas. I hope we don't, but, you know, it could be done, having to get things done so quickly, getting classrooms back together and moving stuff around. So, you know, there are some concerns out there about you know, not, and I know that we've been talking about it, but not having, a lot of the stuff already in place to make the transition. So I worry about the rush to getting everybody back in there.
I think, Mr. Francis, that I've looked at it, ever since the Senate bill was introduced, I know a lot of our schools were already saying, oh, okay, let's prepare, let's get ready. So a lot of them have prepared their classrooms and taught the teachers, okay, now we can get these chairs back in this classroom, we can get that. I think that's been a lot of preparation that we haven't seen in the forefront as far as being in here, but there's been a lot that I've heard that has been done previously, because this bill's been out for a while. We've fought the Senate bill, and then we fought through the House bill, and trying to figure out what we can do. And like you say, I know there's been discussions within the schools ever since that happened, as far as anxiety to have these changes ready. So, and I do agree with you. Yeah, it's quick, it's sudden. I feel like there's been more preparation that we may not be aware of that's happened within our schools.
Mr. Chairman, I want to go back to something you said about middle and high schools. You know, elementary schools have been going since October. Middle and high schools are obviously what we're talking about, Plan A. I think something else we're forgetting to think about is, as of a couple of weeks ago, only about 60% of our personnel were signed up for the vaccination, correct? So they're going to be going with roughly 40%, maybe a few more or a few less, like you said, have gone other places, but they're still going to be going with 40%, maybe slightly less, with people that have chosen not to get the vaccination also.
Any other questions or comments? There being none, we'll vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Division, we have 2 negative votes from Mr. Clark and Mr. Francis. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Okay. Motion still carries. Thank you very much, Dr.
Thank you, Board. Important decision.
Thank you, Dr. Nolte.
Thank you very much. We'll get some information out tonight.
Okay. There being nothing else come before the board, meeting adjourned.